Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm joined today by Tanner. Tanner, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hi, my name is Tanner Hackett. I'm the CEO of Counterpart. We are a management liability and professional liability MGA, meaning that we provide the underwriting, claims, and risk management support to thousands of different small businesses across the US.
You recently had a report finding that 27% of CEOs and business owners of small, medium-sized businesses consider managing remote workers a major challenge, one of the biggest challenges in the last year. And that was your previous year's report. Tell me more a little bit about that. Why do you think they find that to be such a big challenge? What perhaps are the legal challenges, other challenges that they experience around hybrid work and remote work? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it was a pretty exciting survey that we did because lots of novel findings, some that you would expect. First of all, as in asking small businesses how confident they were in their risk posture, all of them were extremely confident. And so I appreciate their enthusiasm. But we noticed a trend around, namely, how they engage with their employees and more specifically, around how they manage this ever-changing dynamic with remote and in-office work. And so what we found is that, this was very top of mind. This was 2023 when we conducted the survey. I think it was mid 2023, and one of the topics both that came out in the survey and in our conversations with small businesses is the need for a playbook, a need for a better understanding of what to expect from remote work, how long this will be around, if it's something that they need to plan for the long term, or is it something that eventually, we're going to revert back to the in-office collaboration that we saw before. I think the net of it is it's all of it. It's everything. It's not binary between one or the other. But these businesses are being forced to take a stand and build out processes and routines that are going to support whichever choice that they take. But they need to they need to chart their path now, because employees are asking for how they plan their lives around this work relationship.
That's interesting. So I just literally last week gave a keynote to at the American Bar Association's legal malpractice conference. And the point of that keynote was about some expert in hybrid and remote work. I helped over 24 companies figure out, including law firms, other small, medium-sized businesses, professional service firms. That's what I specialize in, figure out their future of work. And what I was talking about, this was a lot of insurance companies, and the topic of the playbook was a major topic of conversation, where there were a number of law firms that did not really have a good playbook for hybrid work and remote work. They didn't have good policies and practices. And what I was talking specifically about is what we're seeing is that insurance companies are charging them a higher rate because they don't have clarity around their practices in terms of hybrid work and remote work. And that's causing some risks for those companies that don't need to be there if they have a good approach to hybrid work and remote work. So what have you seen specifically in terms of risks and premiums, and perhaps insurance companies charging more for businesses that don't really have a thoughtful, intentional approach to hybrid and remote work?
So I'll say that I've never heard of a insurance company specifically debiting for a company being remote. However, I think it's more of what you mentioned around not having a playbook for how they operate.
That's what I'm talking about. Not having a playbook, not having a good approach, not having good processes and practices, risk management, and so on in place to address hybrid and remote work.
Yeah, which is understandable, because a lot of these businesses before 2020, and when they were forced to be a remote company, all their policies, all their behaviors, their cadences, their culture was around an in-office model. We didn't know how long we were going to be in office, and people just kind of let it sit and their handbooks probably haven't been updated very much since that point in time. This old framework for building their company. And so I think now is a time. I mean, we're 4 years past COVID, and companies are having to make that decision on, do they continue as a remote business or do they go back to in office? And I think it is reasonable for insurance companies and employees to press their companies on what those expectations are, and to choose a lane. Because what we're seeing is oscillation between businesses and dipping their toes in, and then seeing that nobody wants to come back to the office and pulling back and saying, just kidding, we're not going to do that to you. And frankly, either one is just okay. But your point is, what is our strategy? How do we provide the support, the infrastructure, the guidance, so that not just our current employees, but future employees know what to expect?
Yeah.
And I think that is the trade that you're making whenever you join a company. It is you're leaving something that in promise of something that has been expressed to you through a few hours of recruiting. And if they were to land at this business and it is different, that's where you could expect some friction to arise. And that in itself is not actually going to lead to a lawsuit. Oftentimes people say things that are partially true, or they're taking their own lens to the facts. And I think where we see potential litigation is if somebody changed their lives. They're a caregiver and they're expecting, and the caregivers are protected classes in certain jurisdictions. If they're a caregiver and all of a sudden they're being forced to go back to an office and they just can't meet that expectation, or in certain cases, if they have certain disabilities and they bought into this company that they thought was going to be comfortable with their existing lifestyle, and this is obviously going to be a challenge for them to work around these new expectations of the business. So I think defining that clearly up front for your current employees and future employees is the first step. And then also being clear about what is acceptable if you are going to move people back to an office. What actually constitutes in office? Is it a hybrid? Is it certain days a week? Because I can certainly see the benefits of going back to the office. It does breed creativity to be around great people. But if you only have a few people sprinkled in throughout the day, and on different days, then you lose that general benefit. Then you have people just commuting into the office without a lot of meaningful benefits.
That makes a lot of sense. And those are some really valuable insights. Now, to turn the lens to you, what's the remote work policy at Counterpart itself? What's your approach to remote work?
So we were a remote first company. When I started this business in 2019, after having created some pretty large businesses, several hundred people that were all co-located, I decided to make this a remote company.
Okay.
And this was based in principle because I had obligations in LA. I was previously living in New York, and I moved to LA, and I wanted to start this business. I knew there was an opportunity, but I wanted access to the best talent across the nation. I didn't want to be pigeonholed into just LA talent, which is fantastic, nothing against it. But I am in the insurance space, and there's a big presence on the East Coast and Midwest. And so that really drove me to give this a test. And as I've gone down this path, I've actually met quite a bit of resistance. This was, again, 2019. I actually faced some investors that were against the idea of building a remote company. They said it couldn't be done at scale, even though we had a few examples of businesses that had reached really promising valuations and really exciting success. They hadn't themselves seen it done well. And so I had investors that opted out because of that fact.
Oh, wow.
Since then, remote work has actually become something very accepted in the entrepreneurial community. Although I will say that it's there are unique challenges to it. I will admit, as somebody that was formerly only experienced with in-office culture, we had to be very vigilant with putting in place practices such as our weekly kickoff meetings, building robust reporting infrastructure and transparency on what people are doing, and setting clear expectations across the organization about what great looks like. Because a lot of that benefit of being in the office comes from the osmosis of watching what other people are doing and trying to mimic it. It's very difficult if you're remote. How do you actually glean these best practices? Well, it has to be written down. It has to be communicated directly versus seeing it just done in person. So I can happily say that 4 years into this business, it was the right decision for us. I've had peers that have struggled with it though, largely because they didn't invest in the system and the architecture. But we've been able to hire incredible talent from across engineering, from across the insurance landscape, and pair them together and solve some really exciting challenges.
That's excellent. Sounds like you're adopting a number of best practices. And yeah, whenever I see companies having problems with remote work, it's because they are trying to use office-based methods to work remotely, and they haven't figured out that you do need to be much more intentional about writing things down, communicating them effectively. One of the challenges that I see, you haven't mentioned, maybe you already do something about this, is how do you effectively bring junior staff on board? How do you mentor them? What's your approach to hiring? Obviously, if succeeded in scaling, what has been your approach to mentoring, getting on board junior staff to make sure that they're successful in the company?
Yeah, I will admit that realizing that this was a challenge early on, we did focus on more experienced people as the foundation for the business. So both from an engineering, data, and insurance perspective, we had pillars of these respective institutions that were founded, and then they took their experience and were able to put it down on paper and be very prescriptive about what great looks like to somebody that is more junior. That more junior person then takes this ledger and obviously contributes to it our own way. We're trying to create that diffusion, this waterfall of knowledge and responsibilities across the organization, which is a really powerful thing if you think about it.
Yeah.
Because in an office, you become an atomic unit, and your atomic unit only spreads as far as those people that you can touch directly. And really, like if you think about it, we've always had remote offices. If you're a large enough company, you're remote by nature because you got an office in San Francisco, you got an office in New York, you got an office in LA, Chicago, etc. That is remote work. And so you create these units of experience that oftentimes aren't going to be forced to put things on paper, and therefore it lives exclusively in these offices. In a remote company, once you actually build that infrastructure, you're educating the people that part of the job is the documentation, part of the job is the knowledge transfer. You can do this at scale and very rapidly, more rapidly than a company that actually has an in-office work style.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've definitely been finding that, and that's why a lot of newer companies are much more likely to start and stay remote, because they already create the right culture and they're able to establish and scale themselves. And of course, it costs a lot less when you don't have to pay for the office space, let's be honest. Excellent. Well, good. So
yeah, I think one thing to add there, though, is that you can't get away with strictly remote. You do need to bring humans together. We are by nature social creatures. And so we take a posture of trying to get together with a company twice a year, an entire company offsites. And then for each team and function, we're trying to get them together every quarter. And so this does breed trust when you're able to see somebody. It just doesn't translate necessarily one-to-one or what's on paper with the intent. So I would say that, take that money that you're saving in office in your office space and plow it into really great on-site experiences with great coaches, mentors, and some fun for the team.
Yeah, I mean, the companies I work with do that, but they find it's like maybe it's less than a tenth of the money you would spend on real estate, realistically. I mean, like you spend a lot of money in real estate. Getting together once a quarter is not that much compared to the real estate costs.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, as we wrap up, what do you see as the future of remote work from observing both what's happening within Counterpart and what you're seeing with your clients?
So I think some of the stuff we addressed around just the work environment, make sure you're aware of how at a federal, state, and local level, the respective legislation views remote work, protected classes, etc. I think you have to get smart on this because it should impact your decision making. Certain cities and states look at this very differently. So this is one of the reasons I built Counterpart. It's to help small businesses, and one of those tools to do so is insurance. And so employment practices insurance protects you in the event that you're not aware of a certain requirement of a city, and you face litigation as a product of that. And then in terms of how you think, given the options that are available to you based on where your company is located, I think you have to expect that remote work is going to be a big part of how we operate, both in terms of our companies broadly, but also teams being remote and distributed, and our customer base, how we serve our customer base. Because it's much easier if you have these atomic units that go from offices, as I mentioned, in the Midwest to atomic units of one that are distributed across the country. As long as you're empowering them to be successful and they don't feel like they're on an island, I think it's a very powerful force multiplier for any business.
Excellent. That's a great message to leave with. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Tanner. That was very helpful.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Gleb.
And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show, and it helps us improve the show.